So, I'm trying to fry this candy bar loose, right?
Right.
And I give it a good tug, and suddenly the vending machine starts tipping.
Oh, shit.
Oh shit is right. Luckily they're later than most vending machines. I honestly thought it was the end for a second. Death by a vending machine.
Welcome to the Edge. It is not the end of the world, but you can see it from here.
Now a decade since its release, it still blows my mind how well Deus Ex Human Revolution turned out. It was a follow-up to one of the most beloved games of all time, Deus Ex. And the original developers of Deus Ex, Iron Storm, took a crack at the sequel. They fell short. Eidos Montreal, a newly founded studio under the Eidos umbrella with none of the original developers, had an incredible challenge ahead of them. Develop an immersive sim that, while beloved by players, more often than not never had huge sales numbers. Develop a Deus Ex game that takes a more streamlined approach compared to the original, but still produce something that hardcore fans will enjoy and not lose the heart of the original. After several years of hard development, Deus Ex Human Revolution was met with critical and commercial success, introducing many to the franchise and mostly satisfying series veterans. While it's not as good as the original, and granted, what is, Human Revolution was a product that is more than worthy of having the Deus Ex name attached to it. Even with a more streamlined approach and using many popular game design trends at the time, Human Revolution never feels like a design by committee game. Something that most large budget games start to shift towards in the late 2000s, and something that continues to this day. And while it's tragic, or as JC would say, what a shame, that Eidos Montreal's fate is to now work on Marvel IPs, a fate in which, to paraphrase Adam Jensen, that they never asked for this. Let's take a look at what put these studios' name on the map. Their first title, Human Revolution. So, how did this game come together? The original developers of Deus Ex, Iron Storm, folded in 2005 after taking a couple cracks on making a third iteration. Eidos Interactive, the owners of the IP, founded the Montreal branch of the studio in 2007. They sat down and played through the original two games and looked at what did and didn't work and how to streamline, iterate, and innovate on what came before. After they got the green light from the higher-ups, they began development on what was then known as Deus Ex 3. The game would be a prequel to give the team some breathing room in what kind of approach they would want to take. Eidos Montreal took a different model of design, developing a game with smaller teams but over a longer time frame. In late 2007, a teaser trailer was dropped. I remember at the time being curious about it and waiting to see more.
Soon, one answer will override all others.
There were some concerns I and many others had, however, as news trickled out about the game. There would be regenerating health, and there would be a cover system. A lot of those modern-day design trappings. News was quiet for quite some time, until Eidos was acquired by Square in 2009. And then, E3 2010, the trailer for Human Revolution dropped. My god, this trailer.
I never asked for this. She would try to change something.
In making this video, I watched a trailer again for the first time in years, and you should too. This is how you make a trailer. Taking a quick glance through the YouTube comments, there's a number of them talking about it's one of the best trailers ever made, and if you look up best game trailers, this trailer pops up on many of the lists. Now under the Square Enix umbrella, they had access to Visceral Works, which helped with the cutscenes, a blending of East meets West. So let's jump into Human Revolution's intro. The year is 2027, and before we start off, we got this cutscene with Bob Page, and yep, that's the original voice actor as well.
Is everything in place?
Almost.
What do you mean, almost?
It could have been easy for them to just recast this role, but to bring back the original voice actor is a really welcome touch. While we don't know who everyone is who he's talking to, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bogdanov twins and Klaus Schwab were on this call as well. We're then introduced to our protagonist Adam Jensen, and how Megan Reed has made discoveries that will open up the possibilities for human augmentation at Seraph Industries, their employer.
Megan, we're leaving for DC, and Adam, you're there, good.
While we get a bit of an awkward on-rails segment, we learn about the work that Seraph does, what Adam and Megan do there, how Megan runs this team, what's at stake, problems, their relationship, meeting Pritchard, and meeting the boss man himself, David.
You've been here long enough to know of Eric. You wouldn't be avoiding me, would you?
I wouldn't dream of it, Dr. Reed.
I think I know why Declan's readings are off.
I forgot to leave her a key so she can walk Kubrick. He's gotten big, you know. Keeps knocking over all my plants.
Did you destroy that vase yet?
I moved it. And I fenced in the yard. Like you always said you were going to.
Yeah, never got around to that. Sorry.
Did I interrupt something, Jensen?
You fixed that firewall yet?
You don't fix an entire firewall. You find the loophole and plug it.
Then did you plug it?
Yes, I did.
With that, the facility comes under attack and we're off to investigate.
Use my elevator to get down there. You know the code?
Yeah, 0451.
Let me know what you find.
We have a pretty short tutorial of how combat works. I can't help but wonder if the team just focused on combat here to get those new to the series interested instead of starting with crawling through vents. This part feels vastly different to most of the game. With that, Adam is defeated by the intruders, Megan is taken away, we get an incredible intro cutscene showing Adam's body being rebuilt with augmentations.
Yeah, he's not good to me like this.
Prepare for insertion of ERCC-1 craft.
For some reason, the Motley Crue song Kickstart My Heart feels like it could have been used over this, which I would show you here, but you know how YouTube is with copyright strikes. With that, we cut to 6 months later, Adam all augmented up, and we're off to the races. When it comes to the presentation of Human Revolution, 10 years on, the game still holds up wonderfully and is instantly identifiable. The graphics, while good at the time, were nothing really to write home about, and the animations were clunky, but it's the strong art direction that keeps Human Revolution a visual treat all these years later. Drawing heavy influence from the Renaissance and the Icarus myth, and pulling in the elements of cyberpunk, the game makes heavy use of black and gold colors. And while the game does look more futuristic than the original Deus Ex, in a chance meeting with the art director of Human Revolution, Warren Spector said, "Maybe where the first game visited was just older and more gritty. As a prequel, and with how much games changed in between 2000 and 2011, I didn't overly feel like it was an issue with how different it looked." Warren's justification was good enough. They looked to games like Team Fortress 2 and BioShock for distinct characterization in regards to characters and the setting. And what they ended up with is one of my favorite interpretations of the visual aesthetic of Cyberpunk, far better than Cyberpunk 2077. While the game does pull heavy influence from the Eastern Cyberpunk staples like Ghost in the Shell, I have to wonder how much influence being under the Square Enix umbrella had on the game. It does have an amazing blend of it. Oh, and it's funny that by 2027, they thought that the Final Fantasy series would be at the 27th entry. They'll be lucky to have Final Fantasy 17 out by then, and I wouldn't be surprised if the FF7 remake compilation is still not complete. Oh, and did you know Eidos Montreal actually had a pitch to do a Final Fantasy game that the higher-ups were greatly impressed by at Square? It was eventually shelved, but seeing how Human Revolution turned out, there is some curiosity to see how Eidos Montreal would have handled an entry in the Final Fantasy series. You could check out Super Bunny Hop's video on the topic here and in the description. And I have to note, I am used every once in a while. I get comments saying I sound like Super Bunny Hop. But back to the visuals. Let's talk about the piss filter. This was somewhat of a hot topic when the game first arrived. The game has a goldish tint over it to emphasize the black and gold color scheme. There was no way to shut it off initially besides mucking around with configuration files. A couple years later, the director's cut of Human Revolution was released, and the piss filter was removed altogether, and the game really does lose a lot of the soul as a result. And there was no way to turn it on. If you're on PC, you could get a mod that fixes it and gives you a number of options on how you want it to appear. If you're on console, tough luck. You can't purchase the original title anymore, only the director's cut. It's one of those funny things, right? Complain about something, have it removed, and then realize that, wait, it was actually better with it. I'm usually for removing filters from games. For example, in my Resident Evil 5 video, I removed the filter and the game's colors just burst to life. But here, I'm keeping that piss filter on. The music of Human Revolution is one of those soundtracks that I like to listen to while working. Working over a period of 3 years, the music was initially heavily electronic, but as time went on, sound shifted more to an organic tone. Vocals and strings would be mixed in with the synth. The game makes use of a 3-layer music system, one for ambience, one for tension, and one for combat. So while the tracks aren't as memorable as the tracker-based music of Deus Ex, they're the perfect fit for what the game is going for with its visual approach and its gameplay.
Too late to run!
In development, Eidos Montreal focused on what they called the 4 key pillars of gameplay: combat, stealth, hacking, and exploration. Let's start with combat. Unlike the previous titles, there's a lot more put into the combat, although you still can go non-lethal or ghost the game should you wish. Influence for combat came from games like Rainbow Six Vegas for the cover system, Fear for the AI, Call of Duty for health generation, and Resident Evil 4 for contextual actions and the inventory system. Unlike the first Deus Ex, you won't be starting off aiming like a drunken sailor, although you can get upgrades to reduce recoil. As well, the guns don't feel like pea shooters like they did in Invisible War. They have a lot of punch to them. I was a big fan of using the revolver for this playthrough, especially once you upgrade it to get exploding bullets. We also have access to non-lethal approaches here from various guns like a stun gun, prep gun, or grenades. And while aiming from cover or first person doesn't feel as tight as other games such as Gears of War or any first person shooter, it's still good enough to get the job done. While we don't have melee weapons this time around, we can still make use of melee combat, one of them being the takedown system. Approach an enemy and you'll be given the choice to knock them out or kill them as the game cuts to a third person view to show the results. While it can be a bit clunky in ways, with the rest of the world coming to a standstill as these play out, and the fact it doesn't seamlessly transition between the two, they're still really satisfying to use. They will take up energy, which will recharge on its own or we could refill with protein bars. I guess it's true when Adam says it is a time of great innovation. Another addition is the Typhon system. Get a group together or want to take out a robot quickly, put some of your praxis points here, run up to them, and enjoy. Like the takedowns, it does pause the world around us, but it's incredibly satisfying to use and see the results. And it's one of those things to end off a play session where you just want to goof around.
They spew their poison here. Listen!
One upgrade that we could get is allow us to punch through weak walls, giving us more options for exploration. And what happens when someone is just behind the wall? Sadly, you can't choose to knock them out. It's going to be a kill, so something to keep in mind. One upgrade that you'll want to get is the Icarus landing system. Otherwise, Adam is going to take a lot of damage or outright die from what feels like a comically short fall. With this upgrade, no damage will be taken, and from a certain distance, we'll get Adam dropping down like a bad motherfucker. As well, you could stun enemies when you hit the ground. The enemy AI can be, While they looked at games like Fear, they didn't quite reach that level. Granted, what is? There were a number of times they would just walk up to me as I was sitting around a corner and just did a takedown on them. When it comes to the stealth of Human Revolution, the game took heavy influence from the Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay, which, hey, I've actually covered on this channel, in regards to hiding in shadows, and the Metal Gear series for radar and feedback. So here's the thing when it comes to first-person stealth, unless it's the Thief approach with sound design, I'm not really a fan of first-person stealth. You end up having to use things like seeing through walls or staring at your radar. Now, for Human Revolution, I do appreciate how small the mini-map is in regards to the enemy location, and you can use a lot of praxis points to upgrade this. I chose not to do so. This will allow you to see through walls, patrol routes, cone visions, and granted, those do make sense with the AUGs that Adam has installed into him. However, what makes stealth manageable and actually quite enjoyable in Human Revolution is the cover system. As we're in third person here, you have a much better layout of where enemies are and where they're looking. Again, guards don't just walk in a straight path either, they'll look back instead of just walking in a straight line. You could dart from cover point to cover point and navigate around. I really have to commend the design team for getting this to work as well as it does without feeling overly gamey. The environments are designed in a way that makes sense in how they would be in the real world, but also laid out in a way we can move from cover point to cover point uninterrupted. This is something that's usually noticeable in cover-based games, but they did a great job of it here. In fact, I find the system works so well, I've been surprised that other games haven't made use of it. Of course, this being a Deus Ex game, we have multiple routes of getting through levels, not just the front door. So yes, there is plenty of vent crawling. In fact, one of my issues I do have with Human Revolution is it relies a bit too much on vents when it comes to stealth. The game loves to hide vents behind box stacks or larger objects. So once you know that trick, it's pretty easy to spot and find a vent. I do appreciate how the game calls itself out on how ridiculous it is to crawl through vents.
Backstage area is completely blocked off. Even the janitor can't get back there now.
What about the air vents?
You're kidding, right? Have you seen the size of those vents? You expect a contortionist or midget is going to try to assassinate Taggart?
Don't get smart.
Pulling heavy influence from the Shadowrun tabletop series, the hacking minigame in Human Revolution is one of the better ones around. Moving from node to node, trying to avoid detection, you'll find these encounters can be full of tension, especially early on when you don't have many upgrade points into hacking. You can pick up some items that will briefly stop the countdown timer, allow you to traverse a node undetected. Even though Human Revolution has a long playtime, I didn't feel like I got sick of the hacking minigame. It could be a source of great tension to get that hack done just in time before the timer runs out.
CEO of Taeyong Medical has transferred ownership was officially declared.
Access granted.
Purchase gives Taeyong.
One addition to the director's cut version is the automatic unlocking device. You toss this on a keypad or computer and it will unlock it automatically. In a way, it's like a multi-tool from the previous series, but I do find it a bit of an odd design choice that each unlocking device has the same value. What I mean is it takes one unlocking device to unlock any device, whether that's a hacking level of 1 or a 5. It would have made much more sense to have a device with a higher hacking level to require more of these devices. Of course, you don't need to hack if you find any codes or passwords. Checking through desks, drawers, around the desk, on guards can be overheard in conversations. I wish there was a way you could pickpocket pocket secretaries and try to say that 10 times fast, so you don't have to kill or knock out enemies to get that information. Some passcodes are on stickies, but not overly. It still felt like a lot of the devices needed to be hacked in order to be accessible instead of finding the password. Granted, I guess not everyone has their password lying around or on them. The social system of Human Revolution is one of my favorite aspects about the title, one that I feel doesn't get enough credit for what it does. The dialogue system here takes heavy influence from the Mass Effect series. One thing I appreciate is how the game actually shows what Adam will say. A common complaint about the Mass Effect dialogue wheel is how Shepard would act versus what the dialogue wheel would say could be quite different. One upgrade we could get is the Casey mod. There's a couple levels of dialogue. In the first one with this upgrade, we could release pheromones to influence the target. Through our conversation, we could see if they are an alpha, a beta, or an omega, and you could pick a choice to suit those. No, there's no sigma option. These can allow you to get access to info or items that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Where the dialogue system truly shines is the next level up. The dialogue challenges, speech battles, whatever you want to call it. These are some of the best moments in Human Revolution. In these dialogue battles, a profile will come up to give indication of their personality and what to be aware of, but doesn't outright spell it out for you. Winning these dialogue battles can allow you to bypass challenges. For example, the dialogue battle with Wayne Haas is successful. You could go right into the morgue instead of having to sneak in. And you can win this through various ways. What makes these dialogue battles great is how the game incentivizes you to live with your mistakes. During these conversations, you can't just skip through the dialogue. As well, depending on your response, there still is some variety in what they'll say back to you, so it's not the exact same every single time. However, I do have to note that using the pheromones can be an instant win button in most of these cases.
You see that bodyguard over there? If you're gonna play tricks on the Guilo, you gotta train your people better. Everything about him is shouting out who you really are, Mr. Tong. Now how about we go someplace private? Unless you want everyone in the club to know what you're hiding.
Fine. Fine.
However, you can just ignore these and try to make your way through these dialogue battles with the knowledge of the individual of what you're given. This is the best and most fulfilling way to experience these. Plus, there's a couple of instances in the game where using pheromones end up with these funny situations.
Mr. Jensen, allow me to stop you there before you say anything that might embarrass us both.
What?
Please. I detected your Cassie augmentation the moment you started to analyze my facial movement for pattern sequencing.
Malik.
Jensen, if you even think of using that Casey mod on me, I will hit you.
I wouldn't dream of it.
This dialogue system is up there with Alpha Protocol in regards to making dialogue full of tension, stakes, and fun. Not only do we get great insight into these characters itself with these speech battles, but Adam himself, which we'll get more into the plot later. Before we get into the characters and plot of Human Revolution, let's talk about the level design. There's two kinds of levels in Human Revolution, one being the hub portions and the other being the missions. There are two hubs here, one for Detroit and one for Lower Shanghai. There were plans to have more. The development team had a mostly finished Upper Hingshaw that was cut. There was also going to be a Montreal hub along with a hub in India, but those were cut early on. Looking at how much time and effort they put into Prague into the sequel, focusing on fewer hubs and putting as much detail as them was the better choice. While I don't think the hubs in Human Revolution are as good as Prague and Mankind Divided, they are still excellent. They add to the world building, exploration, and lots of side quests to help flesh out that lore. I do have to note just how much is happening in such a small area of Detroit. But hey, I guess when you're close to Seraph Industries, there's bound to be a lot of activity in the area with what is going on. I do prefer Hangshaw overall as the hub, there's just more to explore and greater variety. We will get to revisit these hubs at various points throughout the game with some changes. Detroit, for example, having the riots and having more side quests, and Hengshaw having more patrols out. One of my favorite tropes in games is revisiting an area that's once familiar and safe, now having enemies around. Mankind did a great job with this later in the game, returning to Prague at night, but sadly here, the revisits don't really have huge changes beyond some additional side quests. Most of our time will be spent in the mission portions, which, as I covered in the gameplay section, give us a number of ways to navigate our way through. Level design is fantastic for the most part, although as I noted earlier, the game can be a bit too reliant on vents in regards to getting around. So now we're getting into the spoiler territory in regards to the plot. The plot of Human Revolution has some standout moments that make it better than the vast majority of games, but there's still plenty of aspects of it that are frustrating and missed opportunities, with signs of running out of time. Granted, pretty much every game will have this issue of running out of development time, but the last stretch of the plot, it's really noticeable. Let's start with the characters. Something I don't think Human Revolution gets enough credit for is how great the characters are in it, with a few exceptions. Even the quest giver NPCs have a lot of personality to them. They feel more like real people with their own personality quirks.
That's when something started going down in this bitch. Something real. What you call it before?
Suspicious.
Word, suspicious. Something real suspicious started happening.
Jensen. My God, it's been a while. Remember me? We used to work the old 17th precinct back in the day. Man, I wish I could go with the good old you haven't changed at all bit, but that'd be complete and utter bullshit, right?
Well, shit. If it ain't the captain himself.
But let's zoom in and look at the key characters of Human Revolution, starting with our protagonist, Adam Jensen.
Rest in peace, Big Rizzle.
Yeah, rip. At least Spec Op's still around.
Adam Jensen is one of the better protagonists around, and for very different reasons than JC was for Deus Ex. While at first he appears as the gruff, brooding protagonist that's been prominent over the last 15 years, he's far more than that. He's overcome some incredible hardships over the last 6 months, but he's still determined to get to the bottom of things, no matter what. We don't get to see his moping around period as it happens.
Welcome home, Mr. Jensen.
In one of the best cases of show don't tell in a game, getting to walk through Adam's apartment gives so much insight into who he is as a character and what he's gone through. The booze, the painkillers, the cards he received, smashed mirrors, the emails about the dog, building a water clock, his love of cereal. We get so much more insight into Adam by just being able to walk around his apartment. Showing where a character lives is such a great way to flesh the character out, and something I wish games made more use of. Say what you will about the Resident Evil 3 remake, but getting to walk around Jill's apartment at the beginning of the game did a great job of giving us an idea of what her mindset was at. It doesn't hurt here in Human Revolution that walking in has some of the game's best music and the game's biggest tribute to Blade Runner with the windows opening. It's not only one of the most memorable moments in Human Revolution, but one of my most memorable moments in any game. And of course, there's that voice. Sure, it is bass boosted, but this is more or less the voice actor's voice.
One of my favorite things about Human Revolution was that the character of Megan, who plays who's the Adam's girlfriend in the game, is played by my wife, Michelle.
There is a moment early on in the game with the Wayne Haas dialogue battle where he gives a bit of a Brooklyn accent. They did mention this is one of the first things they recorded, so he's still trying to find that voice, but it is noticeable.
Okay, look, you're angry, and you've got a right to be. I'm putting you in a bad position, but I have to get inside that morgue. I won't let it get back to you.
And one of the reasons that particular dialogue battle is one of the highlights of Human Revolution is it gets more into the past that these two have, an incident that weighs heavily on both of them. Not only do we get to dig into Wayne, we get plenty of insight into who Adam is and his past. Adam can be direct, but he's not afraid to have a sense of humor. A very dry sense of humor, mind you, but never gets into Marvel quipping territory. Of course, a great character needs other great characters to play off of, which Human Revolution delivers in droves. One of these characters is Adam's boss, David Seraph. While he could be an asshole trying to get what he wants at the expense of others, he's still mostly a good guy at heart, and it's obvious just how much he cares for not just Adam and his team, but his dream of augmentation. It's very endearing to have someone like David stand up to these shadowy figures in the background as opposed to working with them. Plus, there's just something about the way he says Adam that just has this goofy, endearing, dad-like charm to him.
Adam? You're back. Adam! Oh, thank God you came.
Another standout character is Francis Pritchard, head of cybersecurity at Seraph Industries. While he can be a prick at the beginning, there is begrudging respect between him and Adam that evolves over the game. Pulling off this kind of character is really tricky to do right, as it's easy for the audience to just despise the guy. The game gets that right balance of showing deep down he does have some likable traits about him, and how that begrudging respect from the beginning of the game turns more into caring about one another as it progresses.
Jensen!
How can I help you, Francis?
You know why I'm contacting you.
The transmission that's making a mockery of your security efforts?
About time. What happened? You get stuck in an air duct on the way over?
Yeah, nice to see you too, Francis. Have you been able to raise anyone?
I'm picking up several glimmers, but there's too much interference. I think you're on your own, Jensen.
Careful there, Francis. You almost sound like you regret that.
But of all the great characters that Human Revolution brings to the table, I don't think it's a hot take to say that the best side character that works off Adam is everyone's favorite fly girl, Malik. She's got the great hotshot pilot attitude, and early on in the game, she does dig into Adam's state of mind that helps flesh him out as a character. This is something I wish the game made more use of. They have professional, yet playful, and some points flirtful banter.
Bad news, Spy Boy.
Spy Boy?
And while Human Revolution has many highlights, one of the game's best moments is saving Malik when the chopper gets shot down. Showing just how loyal she is to Adam in the mission, she tells us to go on and get on with the mission, which you could do, but that results in her death. Or you could stick around and take down the opposing forces until she gets the chopper up and running. Now, this part is not easy, especially if you're focused on non-lethal. The greatest sign of just how well Malik works as a character are the stories I've read in threads over the years where people drop their non-lethal or ghost playthrough in order to save her. It's really too bad that they never got together and that she only gets mentioned in an Easter egg in Mankind Divided.
Jensen, the bird's fixed and I'm taking off. Now get on with the damned mission. And thanks, Spy Boy.
Now there are other characters, but I'm going to hold off for now and go through the game chronologically and give some thoughts on where things go well with the game and some of its shortcomings, because one character in particular creates the biggest issues with Human Revolution. Once we're past the intro, we're given notification of a hostage situation in a nearby plant. We can go off and explore, but David keeps pestering for us to go, because if we take too long, the hostages will die. It is an interesting decision, since plenty of games will give us quote-unquote false urgency, but here they actually follow through with it. This is the first time we're given to really wander around, so it's enticing to do so and just ignore David. The issue is that this is the only time the game makes use of it. There are plenty of other situations in the game where it seems like it would be urgent, but the game will wait for us. And this mission really emphasizes your choices and makes you aware of it. Whether you go in with stealth, you kill a number of enemies, freeing the hostages, and how you deal with the dialogue battle at the end. You'll get a lot of feedback from people like Pritchard, from David, and from hearing conversations around the staff at Seraph Industries. It's a great bit of showing how much your choices impact the world around you, but beyond a few other moments in the game, we don't get a ton of this. We now have time to walk around the streets of Detroit, where we could progress on the main quest, but we can also do some side quests. While they're not as deep or as engaging as the ones in Mankind Divided, Human Revolution has some excellent side quests to help flesh the world out. While most focus on the augmentation factors and themes, there's a number of them that will flesh out the personal stories of the core characters. One personal quest that we could do here comes from Megan's mother to look into Megan's murder. I am somewhat curious how they decide this quest should be a side quest, but I guess it's there for those who want to explore and find out that not everything is what it seems when it comes to the fate of Megan and the scientists. Another great line of side quests involves taking down a corrupt cop. Not only does it give some insights into Adam's past as a cop, but does help flesh out the gang wars happening in Detroit, and the further we get in, we could see how some shadowy figures are pulling some strings behind the scenes about it. When I first played Human Revolution, I did think it was a bit overkill that all it seems like people could talk about was augmentation. But hey, since we've been through a pandemic for the last 18 months, where most conversations are driven by it, I don't feel that's much as an issue. And as well, we're pretty much at ground zero here since we're in the surrounding streets of where Seraph Industries is located. On the note of focus and themes, the plot of Human Revolution is mostly focused on augmentation. This is both a strength and drawback of the story. It's great that the game focuses mostly on one aspect, how augmentation is impacting the world. However, some of the charm from the original game is lost, where the first game pulled many aspects of conspiracy theories together and weaved them into the story. It's not like they aren't present here in Human Revolution, but the game does feel like it gets pulled more in different directions. The game is a much more personal story with Adam compared to JC, but it also has the overarching plot in regards to augmentation, our journey to get to the bottom of what's going on, and dealing with those working in the shadows. I do give the game credit for not going overboard with doing everything in its power to tie everything into future events of the series. One common trapping with prequels is trying to fill in every little detail and connect everything together, to the expense of the story itself and what it's trying to tell. Still, I have to note that where the plot of the game excels is the personal stories. These are the game's best moments. But this being Deus Ex, there still are the conspiracies as well. There are portions of the game where it feels in conflict with what the game is going for. JC was much more of a blank slate and focused more on the conspiracies. And speaking of the conspiracies, I do love the Lazarus radio show. The irony of knowing what we know and just how much on the mark he can be with it.
No one should be wary of China. They've been moving in on everything American in the past 25 years. But getting worse. How does that make any sense? AIDS isn't the only virus making a comeback. Tuberculosis, Alaska, that are firing millions of watts into our stratosphere and causing mass destruction across the globe.
The elite are all about transcendence and living forever and the secrets of the universe, and they want to know all this. Some are good, some are bad, some are a mix.
The game's main plot can be a bit difficult to follow after a while, going from point to point, but it's a fun ride. However, there's a section near the end of our first visit in Detroit that's one of the game's biggest issues. We get a case of cutscene incompetency with Adam, and we get our first boss fight. The boss fights in Human Revolution have become infamous over time. It's widely known how the team ran out of time and outsourced them. In the original game, if you didn't have the lethal focus build, these are pretty difficult. However, for the director's cut, they redid these fights to have more options, and when I did this playthrough, I was more lethal focused, so they were okay. But the game would have been much better off if they weren't included. And on the note of the 3 boss fights, the game doesn't do much to flesh out these characters beyond reading emails. This was instead part of the extended universe that the series built out with books and comics. Still, they should have done some fleshing out within the game. One of Human Revolution's strengths is how efficiently it can flesh out some characters. So it's a bit puzzling and disappointing to see these 3 characters more or less be 3 disposable baddies without that extra knowledge that comes from the books and comics. And in one of the largest stretches in the plot, the boss as he is dying gives us a location, and that's all we have to work with. But how can we trust him? If we read an email or a pocket secretary from on him, that's okay. This is all we have to work with, is just his word. I do give the game credit that calls itself out when we do need to make a number of stretches in regards to leads, but this one could have been handled better.
That's a pretty big leap, Jensen.
We've been making big leaps for a while now.
Human Revolution also has a bit of a immersion breaking in what I like to call the convenient chopper hangar. Instead of going back the way we came, there will either be an elevator that takes us back to where our chopper was, or there will be a chopper land space nearby. There's one part of the main quest early on where we have to shut off a satellite, and there's a chopper landing pad right there. Why couldn't we just land there in the first place? They didn't shoot Malik down as she was landing, so why didn't we just do that? After that, we're off to Heng Sha, in which I feel is the game's best stretch in regards to the hub, but also the side quests. One side quest that has some great insight into the world of augmentation is finding this woman who's worked hard to become a broker and needed augmentation to compete with the rich, as she came from a poor background. This is something that Human Revolution didn't do enough of. Show more of these differences that augmentation has made in the world between those that have them and those that don't. One personal quest here that's a highlight involves Malik, in which we solve the murder of one of her friends. Not only does it give insight into the corruption that goes on here, but we get more time with Malik, which is also great, with the ending of the quest being extremely satisfying.
Are you facing the hive? It's almost showtime. In 3, 2...
Malik.
Just watch.
I don't know. Evelyn, that stupid bitch! She was going to ruin me. I didn't mean to kill her, okay?
Malik, remind me never to piss you off.
After everything you've done here for Evelyn, for me, you'd have to try pretty hard, mister.
After some more chasing of leads, including meeting Papa Tong, Father Tracer Tong from Deus Ex, we're going to be breaking into Tai Young Medical, a competitor of Seraph Industries. This is the point where the conspiracy portion really starts to come more into the forefront. We also got the game's most frustrating case of cutscene incompetence.
Please, you've made it this far. Surely you can protect me. Surely. Surely you can protect me. Huh. Men never fail to underestimate women.
Although maybe she was packing a casing mod, maybe she used those pheromones to lull us into a false sense of security, and after getting information about Megan and her team not being dead, Adam takes a proactive approach to the plot and heads off to Montreal to Picus to talk with the newscaster Eliza Kassan. As great as it is here that Adam is being proactive in the plot, shouldn't have entering a 24/7 news center with the building evacuated set off a lot of warning bells in his head. That said, this Picus level is one of the game's better ones. It's a nice touch that Eliza's office is 404. Going further down to the building gives some great insight into the media manipulation that Picus does, and tying it more into the conspiracies that are happening behind the scenes. It's when we get back to Detroit that David gives a name to those that we're dealing with as things are heating up. The Illuminati.
You're talking about... the Illuminati?
It's no joke. They're organized and they operate over and above society.
We could do some more side quests here that deal with Adam that have some huge implications in the series, but more on that later. We'll head back to Hengsha again, getting closer in our chase to find Megan and the other scientists. Plus, we get to meet a young Tracer Tong. I have to note in regards to the ties the game makes to future installments, it doesn't ever feel like the game is nudging us going, hey, remember that character? And with that, we're off to finally get to where Megan and the scientists are being held. Well, actually, there's this DLC to deal with first.
Richard, I'm going off the grid for a while. Not sure how long.
Why? What are you up to, Jensen?
Following a lead.
And where exactly is this lead taking you?
You there! Get that cargo, clear the fire! We're pulling out now! Load and secure those pods!
Answer me, Jensen. Where are you going?
Hell if I know, Pritchard. Hell if I know.
So now it's time to talk about the Missing Link DLC. This DLC has some of the best level designs in the game, has some great characters, twists, and implications for the future of the story. But here's the issue. With the initial version of the game, this was a DLC, but in the director's cut, you have to play it here instead of getting to choose otherwise. And as great as it is, it's fairly jarring as a result. I'm not sure why they didn't give us the choice here to play it at this point in the game or play it separately, because it is a bit of a momentum killer. It's nice to see Dr. Savage from Deus Ex make an appearance here in a way that doesn't exactly feel shoehorned in. And the plot here does help make what appears at the end of the game feel less out of nowhere. The game here hides loading screens here with these biometric scanners. And as much as I do enjoy this portion, there is a frustrating point near the end where you have to run back and forth between a few points. It gets annoying because they're separated by these biometric scanners. I would say the best moment in the DLC comes near the end, where we're given the choice of having to save a group of prisoners or a whistleblower that can help expose what's going on here. However, what the game doesn't tell you is that there's a third option, and that you could save both the prisoners and the whistleblowers if you're observant enough. It's always nice to see a game give you additional choices without laying them out for you. So after this section, we end up at the Omega Ranch, where we could finally meet up with the scientists and Dr. Megan Reed. Oh, Megan Reed. So I mentioned before that with a few exceptions, Human Revolution has excellent characters. Megan is one of those exceptions. She's a frustrating character in which it feels that a lot of her content got cut, and that's what happened. So let's back up a little bit here. Megan and Adam used to be an item, but are no longer. What's happened to her and the other scientists and finding her has been most of our focus for Human Revolution. But we're also dealing with these conspiracies and the large-reaching implications. There's still a personal story of Adam getting to the bottom of this. So in this case, I'm wondering if the writers made the right choice of having them once been item as opposed to setting the game where they're still together. There could have been some more time between them before Megan gets taken away. We do have some nice moments between them at the beginning, but before we know it, she's gone. And as great as Adam's apartment section is, there could have been more to show the relationship to get us to care about her more. Yes, we know she's important when it comes to the research, but I would have liked to see the game make more of their relationship at the forefront to get us to care about her more. But there is one thing in particular in Human Revolution when it comes to big leaps and stretches, again, which the game calls itself out on.
That's a pretty big leap, Jensen.
We've been making big leaps for a while now.
There's a really big stretch between Adam and Megan. So when you revisit Detroit, there's a side quest that you could get that digs more into the past of Adam. You'll learn about his childhood and just how special he is in regards to his DNA as a result of genetic therapy treatments. This information was swept away and buried. So one day in a rush to get results, Megan uses Adam's DNA without telling him. As a result, has a breakthrough in their research in regards to making human augmentation more accessible. Now, I've dug through notes, wikis, forums. As far as I can tell, this just happens to be a coincidence. It's a bit of an understatement to say how much of a stretch this is, that one of the top scientists in the world just happens to be in a relationship with the man who had the DNA key to break through in her research. Now, if the game somehow implied that Megan came across this information, got close to Adam to make use of his DNA, and then ended up falling in love, that could be really interesting and could lead to some really interesting conflict. But back to the game, when we finally meet Megan, we have a conversation that lasts a couple minutes before she's gone from the rest of the game as we deal with the game's final act. If there was ever a moment in Human Revolution to have a dialogue battle, this would have been the moment. Imagine, if you will, if you had done those side quests, we can bring up that information in our conversation to get more insight into what Megan was thinking. What should have been one of the game's highlights ends up being a wet fart. And this is what makes Megan such a frustrating character. It's less about her character, but more that gets cut and swept away. Because when you look at the grand scheme of things, what she does here in that conversation that she has with Bob Page after the credits, her work has huge impacts into the future of how the series plays out. I don't see her as being an evil scientist. She seems more obsessed with the research itself, not the widespread implications that will happen as a result. She comes across as really naive. And to make things worse, Mankind Divided did very little with her. Beyond the side quest, she's barely mentioned at all. I'm not sure why she was featured so low in Mankind Divided considering what she's done. Because we'll never really get to know what her fate was unless we get a third title, and even then, will the game explore it? I wouldn't be surprised if Bob Page simply disposed of her when he had no more use for her. So that's what makes Megan so frustrating. The game full of great characters, the one who is so key to what happens in the plot, we get fragments of her role in it, and it doesn't get explored.
David's just stepped out for a moment, Mr. Jensen. But do come in. I've been hoping to meet you.
Mr. Darrow, I'm surprised you even know who I am.
So I haven't mentioned him until now, but let's talk about Hugh Darrow. A mentor to David Seraph, a hero to Megan, he was the father of mechanical augmentation. And in an ironic twist, he himself cannot make use of augmentations due to a rare genetic defect. Hugh Darrow pops up throughout the game, and we hear him mentioning about Pangaea, an installation in the Arctic Ocean focusing on combating global warming. When this is first mentioned in conversation with him, it did feel a bit out of nowhere. As I mentioned earlier, Human Revolution was mostly focused on the augmentation aspect of things, whereas Deus Ex pulled from various areas in regards to weave its narrative with its conspiracy theories. Along with the Illuminati, he was using the scientists to tweak augmentation that allowed the Illuminati to have greater control over people. However, Hugh had his own agenda and set off a signal that drives augment people to have hallucinations and go insane, which is known as the Aug Incident as it was in Mankind Divided. Hugh Darrow is a fascinating character, and the dialogue battle that you have with him near the end of the game is one of the game's best. His reasoning for doing what he does was to drive humanity away from augmentation. He initially wanted to use augmentation to heal, but he started to see that corporations and the Illuminati were going to make use of it to control people, so he wants to show the world the consequences. However, there's also this underlying factor that he himself is resentful that despite being the father of augmentation, he could not make use of them due to a rare genetic defect. This is something you could call him out on in the dialogue battle.
You know, I've always wondered about that leg brace of yours. Why the father of augmentation doesn't have the most basic of implants. Doesn't make much sense, really. Unless he's one of the few people genetically incompatible with this technology.
You think I've done all this because a fluke of nature robbed me of my chance to become a part of it? I tried everything, damn you. Everything I could think of to change. None of it worked. None of it!
It's hard to say how much of what he did was driven to thwart the Illuminati and how much was due to resentment, which does make him a really fascinating figure in the story of Human Revolution. Oh, and if you ever thought to yourself, his voice sounds really familiar, it's because he's Mr. Ratburn from Arthur.
Cake. I thought you might want to see the spring reading list. Oh, are you having cake?
Pangaea, the game's final mission, takes a noticeable departure at first that has a great feeling of unease and tinges of horror. It's quiet and eerie, and once we make some progress, we'll run across hallucinated augmented people. You could see some of the Bioshock influence here in how they act. This is also an interesting mixture of the game's narrative and gameplay. Do you use lethal or non-lethal force against those who have no control of what they are doing? While it's not quite as the same level of saving Malik, it's one of the game's better usages of having the narrative and gameplay weave together in a compelling way. We run to David Seraph and Taggart, someone who I haven't mentioned yet, someone who is anti-augmentation and is with the Illuminati. Hugh Darrow wants us to tell the world what really happened here. David Seraph wants us to spin the message that ensures augmentation research continues, and Taggart wants to spin the message to ensure that the Illuminati have more control over augmentations. So we descend and then we end up with this.
Oh my god.
Water pressure nominal at 173 psi.
Who am I?
Communications web online.
I feel cold.
Drones 1 through 3 within operational parameters.
I don't remember.
Drone 4 disconnected.
Let me go.
Processing.
Oh God, please help me. I'm scared.
Core temperature stable. Processing.
Zhao, what are you doing?
Playing the Missing Link DLC, we do have some more indication of what this is and why it's happening. But even then, it feels a bit out of nowhere here. There are mentions of it in the ebooks you could find around, but again, it's felt like it wasn't really building up to it all. This is an issue where Human Revolution focuses so much on augmentation that when it brings up other aspects like global warming or computers using humans to run, it feels a bit out there. Compare that to the original, which took a whole pile of conspiracies and threw them out there and weaved them together. So in the ending credits stinger, it's implied by Bob Page that this has ties to the Morpheus AI that we see in Deus Ex. It does feel overly gamey and does serve as the game's final boss.
Hello, Adam. Welcome to the Edge. It is not the end of the world, but you can see it from here.
And then we have the ending. It's funny how it works out. We end up with Elisa Kassan, an AI, giving us the choice to press 3 buttons to decide what will happen. Or another option to say fuck it and blow this place to hell. This approach is pretty similar to what Mass Effect 3 would do around 6 months later after Human Revolution was released. So here's the things. I don't mind the choices that were given. You could send out Hugh's original message, you could spin the message to fit David's narrative to ensure augmentation continues, or spin the message so that the Illuminati gets more control over augmentation. It's just the fact that you simply give a button press to do so. And yes, this was a case of them running out of time for development. If time wasn't an issue, I wouldn't be surprised if it played out more like the final mission Deus Ex, where we had the choice of 3 endings, we have to do a few tasks in order to achieve them. So with that, Human Revolution comes to a close. It may seem like I got a bit nitpicky there, but it's all out of love. There's so much Human Revolution does right with its narrative, so it gets frustrating when it has all these other aspects of it that don't quite hit the mark. While some of it is a result of time constraints, I'd say more of it is the game trying to tell this balance of something that's more of a personal story, but also having this conspiracy backdrop. And while the original Deus Ex had a cast of memorable characters, some of it had more to do with the game's rough edges, the shoddy voice acting, or the goofy charm. And while it's not like Human Revolution is devoid of rough edges or goofy charm, but it does have character work in the game that few other games can match, and something that I think the game doesn't get enough credit for. So with all that, is Human Revolution better than Mankind Divided? In some ways yes, in some ways no. While there are some frustrations with the narrative, Human Revolution does have a better overall plot with more endearing characters. Mankind Divided sadly put more of the interesting characters in the background, with the core characters that Adam spends time interacting with not being overly engaging. The overall plot and themes of Mankind Divided were a bit heavy-handed. I wasn't sure where they wanted to go with it. It doesn't also help that just as the game was building up to its third act, it ends for a sequel that seems more of a pipe dream as time goes on. Mankind Divided put more focus into one hub with Prague. Golem City is fairly short and doesn't have a ton to explore, and as a result of focusing more on just one hub, builds out some really interesting side quests that, as great as they were in Human Revolution, they go far more in depth and far more engaging in Mankind Divided. Along with a number of the iterative improvements in the gameplay, Mankind Divided offer up some of the best DLC around, especially the DLC set in prison, A Criminal Past. So while Human Revolution feels like the more overall complete package, I do think Mankind Divided is the more enjoyable game, even if it faced a number of publisher shenanigans and was cut off at the knees when it was building to its third act. As great as it's been to replay Human Revolution for this video, there's still some longing of what could have been for the series and the studio itself. While Human Revolution did well, Mankind Divided failed to meet the sales expectations of Square Enix. Although we also have to consider the overall publisher meddling that happened with Mankind Divided to try and squeeze a few more extra bucks out. And the series has been more or less since on ice, with the studio now working on Marvel properties. But the fans sure don't let them forget. Looking at any Twitter or YouTube comments on these Marvel properties in regards to those games, Deus Ex died for this is seen quite frequently. And it really is a shame to have a studio that could put out titles with the immersive sim school of design be shifted towards something else, mostly leaving Arcane Studios as more or less the only large studio that produces games like this. Although over the last few years, we've seen the indie devs have begun to give their own spins on this style of game. To have a newly formed studio take a crack at the Deus Ex franchise, one that's so highly regarded, and manage to create a new entry that wasn't a trash fire, but a title that was more than worthy of carrying the name of Deus Ex attached to it. It's quite an accomplishment. Oh, and their attempt at Thief, let's not go there. Maybe one day Square Enix will take another crack at the series. Maybe we'll get some remastered editions of the Eidos Montreal games. I've been hoping they saw fans clamoring for this kind of game, especially seeing as just how much Cyberpunk 2077 let people down. And yes, Deus Ex and Cyberpunk are quite different, but there's no doubt that there are people clamoring for a Cyberpunk RPG title at a large scale. And while it's mostly going to be the indies that are keeping the immersive sim design philosophy alive, I can't help but lament to the fact that games like Human Revolution won't be seen at a larger scale, as the industry keeps trying to move towards live service titles and getting as much money as they can out of it. There's just so much to explore in Human Revolution, many ways you could tackle these levels and find something new each playthrough. Not to the extent that you could in the original Deus Ex, but more than enough to keep you coming back to it. This was a title I was really looking forward to reviewing. I hadn't played it since shortly after the DLC came out all those years ago, and just to see how well it holds up. We need more games like Human Revolution, and of all the franchises that have got shelved over the last several years, few have saddened me more than having the journey of Adam Jensen incomplete. To see where Adam's journey ends and where JC Denton's begins.
Yeah, rip. Malik.
Jensen, if you even think of using that Casey mod on me, I will hit you.
I wouldn't dream of it. I'm just concerned, that's all.